David Lemieux versus Curtis Stevens is finally on. This fight was scheduled to happen before, or at least they were in negotiations to have the fight happen several months ago in 2016. But now it's apparently done. It will take place on March 11th, and the fight will be held at the Turning Stone Resort Casino in Verona, New York, and it will air live on HBO Boxing After Dark. I'm going to quote both fighters and also Oscar De La Hoya, who is the promoter for David Lemieux, because Curtis Stevens is obviously promoted by Cafe Duvar Main Events. So first of all, I'm going to quote Lemieux. He says, "The time for talking is done. After many long months of hearing Curtis yell about all the things he's going to do in the ring, I'm really looking forward to shutting his mouth on March 11th. I've told everyone my goal is to once again become the middleweight champion of the world. Curtis is in the way and I'm going to go right through him." Now I'm going to give you a brief quote from Curtis Stevens. He says, "The wait is finally over. No more talking. My hands will do the talking on March 11th. And finally, I'm going to quote Oscar De La Hoya here. He says, "We often see fighters pretend to not like each other to help draw an audience. These two guys aren't faking it. They don't like each other at all. Given the thunder each holds in both hands and their desire to make a statement in the middleweight division, I think the fans are going to be in for a knockout, and a spectacular one at that." So those are the words of Oscar De La Hoya. There's no word as of yet as far as who's going to be on the undercard, but I'm sure that'll be forthcoming in the coming weeks or month or so. So let me know what you think of this fight, people. David Lemieux versus Curtis Stevens. I've never really been particularly sold on Stevens. I know he has this reputation as a big puncher and a danger man, but I've never seen this vaunted punching power present itself in a Curtis Stevens fight other than against low-level opposition. I've never seen him go in there and even defeat somebody who was a fringe contender. Maybe there was one guy. Was it Toledo Johnson? Did he even fight Toledo Johnson? I'd have to go and look at his record now. I haven't been following Curtis Stevens that closely, but just to give you an example, Curtis Stevens lost comprehensively to Jesse Brinkley back in the days. More recently, he also lost comprehensively to Hassan Ndam Njikum, and he was dropped in that fight. And that is a common opponent, of course, because, well, they've got at least two common opponents. They both fought Triple G, and they both fought Njikum, Hassan Ndam, as some people like to call him, or some people refer to him as, sorry. And David Lemieux destroyed Hassan Ndam Njikum. He battered him all around the ring, dropped him more times than I can even remember. It was a pretty easy fight for David Lemieux against Hassan Ndam. Whereas when Curtis Stevens fought him, and I believe that was after Lemieux fought him, so it can't have been a better version of Hassan Ndam. Hassan Ndam's always in shape, so it's not like he was out of shape in the Lemieux fight and in shape for the Stevens fight. No. And he fought Stevens, and he boxed Stevens' head off and dropped him. So I've never really been one of these people that sold on Stevens. I've never really understood why people think he's so dangerous. Yeah, I'm sure he can punch a little bit, but I see Lemieux as a more dangerous fighter. I see him as a more dangerous puncher, and I think he's already in his career beaten better opposition than Curtis Stevens has ever beat. And he's equipped himself, he's handled himself at world level, fringe world level, in my view, for the most part, better than Curtis Stevens has. Now, you could argue who did better against Gennady Golovkin. Curtis Stevens was dropped heavily by Golovkin and hurt badly on many occasions. David Lemieux was hurt to the body, but he was never really out of it the way that, well, Curtis Stevens wasn't completely out of it, but he was never really concussed and seriously hurt by Golovkin the way Curtis Stevens was. But then again, a lot of that is probably down to the fact that Lemieux wasn't really engaging with Golovkin uncharacteristic of Lemieux, he didn't want to engage. You know, he had somebody in front of him who was a very, very big puncher and very technically good. And therefore, Lemieux was reluctant to commit with his punches the way that he normally does. Lemieux's, in fact, one of those type of guys who often overcommits. He throws so much of his body weight into a lot of his punches that he leaves himself off balance quite frequently in fights. And that does allow opponents counter-punching opportunities. And it may allow Curtis Stevens counter-punching opportunities. So it's going to be interesting to see how Lemieux goes about the fight, whether he respects Stevens' power or not. Stevens don't have Golovkin-level boxing skills. So from a boxing perspective, Lemieux don't really have anything to worry about. If Lemieux does have any kind of boxing skills, which I really haven't seen in his career, but if he does have any kind of boxing skills to fall back on, he should be able to fall back on them in a Stevens fight if he maybe underestimates Stevens, gets caught with a big shot, and then has to go to plan B, then he should be able to do that. Remember, Stevens is very short for a middleweight. I think he's only about 5'6". David Lemieux's more like 5'9". So there'll be a height gap there. And I think there'll be a power gap. And I think there'll be a skill gap. Not that Lemieux is particularly skilled. He's not. But I do think he is offensively more formidable and more skillful than Curtis Stevens is. So it's not a bad fight at the end of the day. It's okay. It's two guys who, well, I'd say Lemieux's still a contender at middleweight. Curtis Stevens is more of a fringe contender. He's almost dropping down into the journeyman level now, Curtis Stevens, because he has lost several fights. Particularly that last loss that he had against Hassan and Dam. I mean, that was a pretty bad loss, really. You don't want to be losing comprehensively to Hassan and Dam, do you? If you're going to be calling yourself a legitimate contender at middleweight. But that's exactly what happened to Curtis Stevens. So let me know what you think about this fight here, people. Am I selling Curtis Stevens short? Am I giving Lemieux too much credit? Drop it all in the comment section below and let me know how you feel. Who are you picking in the fight? How do you see the fight going? Do you think it may be a fight of the year candidate because you got two big punches, two aggressive guys? Or do you think it might be a little bit of a anticlimax? Let me know. It's Hatman, I'm out.